You were never meant to matter. The words hung in the air like frost, spoken by the woman who should have loved her most. Clara Whitmore stood in the grand hall of Ashford Manor, her aunt's diamonds catching the candlelight while Clara's own dress, mended 3 times at the seams, seemed to absorb the shadows. Across the room, her cousin Vivian glowed like a star, surrounded by admirers celebrating her engagement to Lord Pemberton. And there, in the doorway, stood a man Clara had never seen before, tall, dark-eyed, dangerous in his stillness, watching everything with the focus of a predator. Duke Rowan Hale had arrived, and for the first time in her life, someone was looking directly at her. If you want to see how far a girl with nothing can go when someone finally sees her, stay with me. Drop a like. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. Because what happens next? It changes everything. The manor smelled like old money and fresh cruelty. Clara had learned to identify both by the time she was 12. The money announced itself in beeswax candles and imported French perfume. The cruelty was quieter. It lived in the way her Aunt Eleanor's eyes slid past her at breakfast, in how the housekeeper allocated the smallest room for her bedchamber, in the way her Uncle Richard would forget to introduce her when guests arrived. "Clara, do stand up straight," Aunt Eleanor said now, not even bothering to look at her. "Your posture is dreadful." Clara straightened. She always straightened. 23 years old and still moving like a marionette on invisible strings. The ballroom glittered with winter light reflecting off crystal chandeliers. Ashford Manor had been decorated within an inch of its life for Vivian's engagement celebration. White roses imported from God knows where, silk ribbons the color of champagne, and enough candles to burn down half of Sussex if anyone sneezed wrong. Vivian herself stood at the room's center, radiant in pale blue silk that probably cost more than Clara's entire wardrobe. Her golden hair was swept up in an elaborate style that had taken her lady's maid 3 hours. She laughed, that practiced musical laugh she'd perfected, as Lord Pemberton said something undoubtedly boring but politically advantageous. "She looks like an angel, doesn't she?" someone whispered nearby. Clara bit the inside of her cheek. Hard. Vivian was beautiful. That was just fact. But an angel? Angels didn't spend their private moments listing all the ways their poor cousin was an embarrassment to the family name. Angels didn't accidentally spill wine on Clara's only decent gown the night before important dinners. "Clara," her aunt's voice again, sharper now. "Stop lurking by the window like some kind of specter. Circulate. Make yourself useful." Useful, right. Clara moved through the crowd with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd spent years learning to take up less space. She fetched glasses of champagne for women who didn't thank her. She listened to men drone on about their hunting estates without being asked for a single opinion. She smiled when expected and stayed silent when not. "Poor thing," she heard Lady Hartwell murmur to her companion. "Living on charity all these years. Eleanor is a saint to keep her." Clara's fingers tightened on her glass. A saint. Her Aunt Eleanor, who'd taken Clara in after her parents died, not out of love, but because refusing would have looked bad. Who reminded her daily that every scrap of food, every threadbare dress, every moment of shelter was a gift Clara should be grateful for. "Though I suppose she'll never marry," Lady Hartwell continued. "No fortune, no connections, and frankly no presents. She just fades, doesn't she?" The companion made a sympathetic noise. "Perhaps she could become a governess." Clara set down her glass before she could throw it. She needed air. The terrace doors stood open, an invitation to escape. Clara slipped through them into the winter evening, grateful for the cold that bit through her thin shawl. Out here, she could breathe. Out here, no one watched her with pitying eyes or calculating dismissal. She gripped the stone balustrade and stared out at the darkened gardens. You were never meant to matter. Her aunt had said that 3 days ago, when Clara had suggested, foolishly, that perhaps she might visit the Thompsons in London. They were old family friends of her late parents. They'd sent a kind letter asking after her. "Don't be ridiculous," Eleanor had said, not looking up from her correspondence. "You have no business imposing yourself on respectable people. You were never meant to matter, Clara. The sooner you accept your place, the happier you'll be." Clara had accepted it. She'd been accepting it for 11 years. The question was, how much longer could she keep doing it? Running away or just catching your breath? Clara spun around. The man stood in the shadow of the doorway, tall enough that he had to duck slightly beneath the frame, dressed in black except for a gray waistcoat that probably cost more than her aunt's diamonds. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that wasn't handsome so much as arresting, sharp cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile, and eyes. Those eyes were the color of a winter storm, and they were looking directly at her. Clara's voice came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat. I needed a moment. From what? The question was blunt, not rude exactly, but stripped of the usual social pleasantries. Clara blinked. I'm sorry? What did you need a moment from? He stepped onto the terrace properly now, and she could see him better in the lamplight spilling from the ballroom. The suffocating small talk, the performance of happiness, or the way they all look through you like you're made of glass. Clara's breath caught. He noticed. Of course he noticed. She could see it in the slight tilt of his head, the way his eyes narrowed just a fraction. This was a man who missed nothing. All three, she heard herself say. Something that might have been surprise flickered across his face. Honest answer. You asked an honest question. Most people don't appreciate that. He moved to the balustrade, standing a careful distance away, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to be proper. They prefer the performance. Clara studied him. She should know who he was. Anyone important enough to attend Vivian's celebration should be familiar to her. But she'd been so busy being invisible that she'd stopped paying attention to the guest list. I don't believe we've been introduced, she said. No. He didn't offer his name, just looked out at the darkened gardens with an expression that suggested he found them infinitely more interesting than the glittering ballroom behind them. The silence stretched. Clara should fill it, make polite conversation, comment on the weather, compliment the festivities. That's what women in her position did. Instead, she said, You don't want to be here either. His mouth curved. Not quite a smile, but close. What gave me away? You're hiding on the terrace with a stranger instead of networking with powerful people. Maybe I find the stranger more interesting than the powerful people. Clara laughed, a real laugh, sharp and surprised. Then you have terrible judgment. Do I? He turned to face her fully now, and Clara felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. It was unsettling. No one looked at her like this, like she was worth studying, worth understanding. I'm nobody, she said. The poor relation. The charity case. I live here because my aunt feels obligated, and I'll continue living here until I'm too old to be worth the trouble, at which point I'll be sent to some cottage in the country to quietly disappear. She hadn't meant to say all that. The words just spilled out, sharp and bitter. The man was quiet for a long moment. Then, Your aunt is Eleanor Whitmore. Yes. And the radiant bride-to-be is your cousin. Vivian, yes. He nodded slowly, something calculating moving behind those storm-gray eyes. I'm Rowan Hale. The name hit her like cold water. Duke Rowan Hale. The Duke of Thornwick, owner of half the shipping lanes in England, estates scattered across 3 counties, and a reputation that preceded him like a warning bell. Clara had heard the stories. Everyone had. He'd inherited young after his father's death. He'd lost his wife 3 years ago in circumstances people whispered about but never explained. He was ruthless in business, cold in social situations, and dangerous to cross, and she'd just told him she was nobody. Clara took a step back toward the door. I apologize, Your Grace. I didn't realize. Don't. The single word stopped her. Don't apologize for telling the truth, Rowan said. It's the first interesting thing I've heard all evening. Clara stared at him. I just called myself nobody to a duke. You stated a fact about how you're treated. That's different. He tilted his head, though I'd argue with your assessment. Which part? The nobody part. His eyes held hers. People who are actually nobody don't notice the glass walls. They don't see through the performance. They just exist in it, content. And you think I'm not content? I think you're furious. The word landed like a punch. Clara opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I'm not, she started. Yes, you are. Rowan's voice was matter of fact. I recognize it because I spent most of my 20s the same way, furious at a world that made no sense, surrounded by people who performed their way through life instead of living it. Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together. That's quite an assumption about someone you just met. Is it wrong? No, it wasn't wrong. It was so accurate it felt like he'd reached inside her chest and pulled out the thing she'd been trying not to acknowledge for years. She was furious at her aunt, at her uncle, at Vivienne, at every person who'd ever looked through her like she didn't exist, at herself, for letting them. Why are you here? Clara asked instead of answering. At this party, I mean. You clearly don't want to be. Rowan was silent for a moment. Then, business. Your uncle and I are negotiating a shipping contract. He invited me as a gesture of goodwill. Ah, Clara nodded. And you came because refusing would be politically unwise. Something like that. So we're both trapped. His mouth curved again, that almost smile. Seems that way. Behind them, the music swelled. Through the terrace doors, Clara could see couples forming for a waltz. Vivienne was laughing, her hand on Lord Pemberton's arm, every eye in the room tracking her movements. She's very beautiful, Rowan observed, following Clara's gaze. Clara's jaw tightened. Yes, and very aware of it. That surprised a laugh out of her. You noticed that quickly. I noticed several things quickly. He turned back to Clara. Including the fact that she looked at you 3 times in the past 10 minutes, each time to make sure you were watching her triumph. Clara's breath caught. You don't have to explain it, Rowan said. I understand family politics. My brother and I barely speak. He thinks I'm cold. I think he's naive. We perform civility at required functions and avoid each other otherwise. The honesty was startling. People didn't admit things like that. They didn't acknowledge the fractures beneath the polished surface. Why are you telling me this? Clara asked. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Because you told me the truth first. Seemed fair to return the favor. Inside, someone called for the Duke of Thornwick. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle straightening, a pulling back. I should return, he said. Your uncle will want to introduce me to half the county before the evening's over. Clara nodded. Of course. He moved toward the door, then paused. Miss Whitmore. Yes? The next time someone tells you that you were never meant to matter, his eyes met hers, sharp and certain. Remember that mattering isn't something people grant you. It's something you take. Then he was gone, disappearing back into the glittering ballroom like a shadow dissolving into light. Clara stood alone on the terrace, her heart pounding against her ribs. Mattering isn't something people grant you. It's something you take. She'd never heard anyone say anything like that. In her world, everything was granted, approval, acceptance, even basic kindness. You waited for permission to exist. The cold was seeping through her shawl now, making her shiver. Clara turned to go inside and found Vivienne standing in the doorway. Well, well. Vivienne's smile was sharp. Making friends with the Duke of Thornwick? Clara's stomach dropped. We were just talking. Just talking. Vivienne stepped onto the terrace, her silk dress rustling. Do you know what people say about him, Clara? He's dangerous, cold. His poor wife died under mysterious circumstances. You don't know that. Everyone knows it. Vivienne moved closer. She drowned in the pond on his estate. Tragic accident, they said, but some people wonder. Clara's hands clenched. What do you want, Vivienne? I want you to remember your place. Vivienne's voice dropped, losing its musical quality. This was the real Vivienne, the one who only appeared when no one else was watching. Tonight is my night, my celebration, and I will not have you embarrassing this family by throwing yourself at inappropriate men. I wasn't. You were on the terrace alone with a duke, a widowed duke with a dark reputation. Do you understand what people could say about that? Clara felt heat rising in her face. Not embarrassment, but anger. We had a 5-minute conversation. You had a 5-minute opportunity to make us all look ridiculous. Vivienne's eyes glittered in the lamplight. Mother has already noticed. She's furious. Of course she had. Of course she was. I'll apologize to Aunt Eleanor, Clara said quietly. Good. Vivian turned to leave, then paused. And Clara? Stop looking so miserable all the time. It reflects poorly on all of us. She swept back inside, leaving Clara alone in the cold. Clara's hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from the temperature. Stop looking so miserable. Remember your place. You were never meant to matter. The words circled in her head like vultures. She stood there for another minute, letting the cold bite through her shawl, letting the anger burn through her chest. Then she went inside. The ballroom was even more crowded now. Clara moved through it mechanically, finding a chair against the wall, sitting down, making herself small again. Across the room, she could see Rowan Hale in conversation with her uncle. He looked different now, more distant, more controlled. The man she'd spoken to on the terrace had been almost human. This version was the Duke everyone whispered about. As if sensing her gaze, he glanced over. Their eyes met for half a second. His expression didn't change. Then someone else demanded his attention, and the moment broke. Clara looked away. 3 hours later, the party finally began winding down. Guests departed in clusters, calling their carriages, making their goodbyes. Clara helped where she could, collecting abandoned glasses, directing servants, doing the invisible work no one would thank her for. Clara! Aunt Eleanor's voice cut through the chatter. Clara turned. Her aunt stood in the doorway to the drawing room, her face tight with displeasure. A word, now. Clara followed her into the drawing room. Uncle Richard was already there, pouring himself a brandy. Vivian sat on the settee, looking satisfied. Shut the door, Eleanor said. Clara did. Would you care to explain, Eleanor began, her voice icy, what you were doing on the terrace with the Duke of Thornwick? We were talking. Talking. Eleanor's laugh was sharp. You were alone with a man, an unmarried man, a duke, no less. It was 5 minutes. 5 minutes is enough to ruin a reputation, Uncle Richard said, not looking up from his brandy, especially when you have nothing else to recommend you. The word stung. Clara forced herself to breathe evenly. Nothing happened. That's not the point. Eleanor moved closer. The point is appearances. The point is propriety. The point is that you, a nobody living on our charity, do not get to embarrass this family by making spectacles with inappropriate men. He spoke to me first, Clara said, hearing how defensive she sounded. I didn't. You should have made an excuse and left immediately, Eleanor snapped. You should have understood that a man like the Duke of Thornwick has no business with a girl like you. A girl like you. Unwanted, unimportant, unworthy. Clara felt something crack in her chest. I'm sorry, she whispered. It won't happen again. Eleanor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. See that it doesn't. Now go to your room. I'm tired of looking at you. Clara left without another word. Her room was small and cold and dark. She didn't bother lighting more than a single candle, just sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall. Mattering isn't something people grant you. It's something you take. Easy for a duke to say. He had power, money, title. What did Clara have? Nothing. Just like everyone kept reminding her. She lay back on the bed, still in her dress, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, everything would go back to normal. She'd serve breakfast. She'd run errands. She'd endure Aunt Eleanor's cold disdain and Vivian's casual cruelty and her uncle's indifference. She'd survive. Like she always did. But somewhere in her chest, something burned that hadn't been there before. A small, stubborn spark of anger that refused to go out. 3 days later, Clara was in the library, the one room in Ashford Manor where she could almost pretend to have peace, when the butler appeared. Miss Clara, he said, uncomfortable. There's a caller for you. Clara looked up from her book. For me? Yes, miss. The Duke of Thornwick. The book slipped from her hands. That's impossible, she said. He must be here to see Uncle Richard. No, miss, he specifically asked for you. He's waiting in the drawing room. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Did he say why? No, miss. This made no sense. Dukes didn't call on poor relations. They didn't seek out charity cases for social visits, unless... Clara's stomach twisted. Had someone spread rumors about their terrace conversation? Was he here to demand she clarify things, to protect his reputation? "Tell him I'll be there in a moment," she said. The butler nodded and disappeared. Clara stood up, smoothed her dress, another mended thing, worn at the cuffs, and tried to calm her racing heart. Whatever this was, she'd handle it. She'd apologize if needed. She'd grovel if required. She'd survive it. The drawing room felt too bright, too exposed. Rowan Hale stood by the window, looking out at the gardens. He turned when she entered. "Miss Whitmore?" "Your Grace." Clara curtsied properly this time. "I apologize for keeping you waiting." "You didn't." He studied her for a moment. "Are you well?" The question threw her. Yes, thank you." "You look tired." Clara almost laughed. She was always tired of performing, of shrinking, of surviving. "I'm fine," she said instead. "May I ask why you're here?" Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, "I have a proposition for you." Clara's breath caught. "A proposition?" "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them like something physical. Clara stared at him. "I'm sorry, I must have misheard." "You didn't." Rowan's expression was unreadable. "I'm asking you to marry me, Miss Whitmore." Clara's legs forgot how to hold her weight. She gripped the back of the nearest chair, knuckles white against the upholstery. "You can't be serious. I don't make jokes about marriage." Rowan's voice was steady, like he was discussing shipping routes or the weather. "I'm entirely serious." "But you don't—" Clara's mind spun. "We spoke for 10 minutes, once, 3 days ago." Closer to 15 minutes, and yes, I'm aware of the timeline. Clara stared at him. This had to be some kind of test or a cruel joke, or why? The word came out sharp. "Why would you possibly want to marry me?" Rowan moved away from the window, closer to where she stood, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough that she could see the calculation in those gray eyes. "Because I need a wife who won't perform for me," he said, "and you need a way out of this house." The bluntness of it stole her breath. "That's not—" Clara started, then stopped. Because it was exactly that simple, wasn't it? No pretty words about affection or compatibility, just two people with needs that might align. "I won't lie to you," Rowan continued. "I don't love you. I don't know you well enough for that. But I do know that you're intelligent, honest in ways most people have forgotten how to be, and capable of seeing through the performance everyone else seems content to live inside. Those aren't reasons to marry someone, aren't they?" He tilted his head. "What are the usual reasons? Affection that fades? Passion that burns out? Political alliances that breed resentment? At least this way we both know exactly what we're getting." Clara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the chair. "And what exactly would I be getting?" "Freedom." The word hung between them. "Your own household to run as you see fit. No one telling you that you were never meant to matter. No more living on charity, shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for you." Heat prickled behind Clara's eyes. She blinked it back furiously. "In exchange for what?" she asked. "What would you want from me?" Rowan was quiet for a moment, then, "Honesty. I'm tired of people who say what they think I want to hear. I want a wife who will tell me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then." "That's all?" "And an heir eventually, but there's no rush on that front." Clara's face burned. She looked away. "I realize this is sudden," Rowan said, his tone gentler. "I'm not asking for an answer right now. Take time to think about it." "How much time?" "A week. I'm staying at the Ashford Inn through next Tuesday. Send word before then." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Miss Whitmore, Clara, I won't pretend this would be a love match, but it would be honest. And in my experience, honesty is rarer than love." Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with her spinning thoughts. She sank into the chair, her legs finally giving out completely. Marriage. To the Duke of Thornwick. To a man she barely knew, with a dark reputation and storm-gray eyes that saw too much. It was insane. It was impossible. It was— The drawing room door opened. Aunt Eleanor swept in, Vivian trailing behind her. "What did he want?" Eleanor demanded. Clara's mind went blank. "Don't lie." The servants are already gossiping. The Duke of Thornwick came here specifically to see you. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. What did you say to him at the party? What did you do? Nothing. We just talked. About what? Clara's throat tightened. She couldn't tell them. Not yet. Not until she'd made a decision. He was asking about the local parish, she lied. He's considering a donation. He wanted to know about the community needs. Eleanor's expression shifted, still suspicious, but less hostile. Why would he ask you? I don't know. Perhaps because I was the only person on the terrace. Vivian laughed, the sound sharp. How charitable of him. Making conversation with the poor relation about parish work. Did he pat you on the head too? Clara's jaw clenched. May I be excused? I have a headache. Eleanor waved her away dismissively. Go. And Clara, if the Duke calls again, you are indisposed. Understood? I won't have you embarrassing this family further. Clara left without answering. In her room, she pressed her back against the door and tried to breathe. A week. She had a week to decide if she wanted to marry a stranger. No, not a stranger. A man who'd looked at her like she was worth seeing, who'd noticed the glass walls and the performance and the fury she'd been swallowing for 11 years. A man who'd offered her freedom. But at what cost? That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, turning the problem over in her mind like a puzzle with missing pieces. What did she actually know about Rowan Hale? He was a duke, wealthy, powerful. His wife had died 3 years ago, drowned, Vivian had said. People whispered about it. He was cold, ruthless in business, avoided society when possible. He'd lost his father young, had a brother he barely spoke to, and he'd stood on a terrace in the cold and told her that mattering wasn't something people granted you. It wasn't enough. None of it was enough to base a life-changing decision on. But what was her alternative? Stay here. Endure Aunt Eleanor's disdain and Vivian's cruelty and her uncle's indifference. Wait until she was too old to be useful, then get shipped off to some cottage to fade away completely. Clara rolled onto her side, pulling the thin blanket tighter. She'd been surviving for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to actually want something. Did she want this? The question kept her awake until dawn. By morning, Clara had made a decision. Not about the marriage. Not yet. But about what she needed to do next. She needed more information. After breakfast, she slipped out of the manor and walked to the village. The lending library was small, tucked between the apothecary and the bakery, but the librarian, Mrs. Pemberton, no relation to Vivian's fiancé, kept newspapers from London. Looking for anything specific, dear? Mrs. Pemberton asked. Society news, Claire said. From the past few years. Mrs. Pemberton's eyebrows rose, but she didn't ask questions. Just pulled out 3 years' worth of papers and left Clara to it. Clara spread them across the reading table and started searching. There. November, 3 years ago. Tragedy strikes. Thornwick Estate. Duchess Catherine Hale. Found dead. Clara's hands trembled as she read. The details were sparse. Catherine Hale, Duchess of Thornwick, had been found drowned in the pond on the estate grounds. She was 26 years old. The official ruling was accidental death. She'd been known to walk the grounds at night, and it was assumed she'd lost her footing in the dark. But the article also mentioned that the Duke and Duchess had been seen arguing at a ball 2 weeks before her death, that there were rumors of unhappiness in the marriage, that the Duke had inherited substantially from his wife's family fortune. Clara felt sick. She kept reading. More articles, society columnists speculating, friends of the late Duchess giving carefully worded statements about how devoted the couple had seemed, distant relatives questioning the official story, and then, 6 months later, Duke of Thornwick withdraws from society, estate closed to visitors. Nothing after that. Just silence. Clara sat back, her mind racing. Either Rowan Hale was a grieving widower who couldn't bear society's speculation, or what? A murderer? The thought made her stomach turn, but she couldn't ignore it. Find what you needed? Mrs. Pemberton asked. I'm not sure, Clara said honestly. She walked back to the manor slowly, trying to piece it together. Rowan had said he was tired of performance, that he wanted honesty. But what if he was the one performing? What if this whole thing, the proposal, the bluntness, the promise of freedom, was just another kind of trap? Clara needed to know. That evening she wrote a letter, short, direct, with none of the flowery language usually expected. Your Grace, I need to understand what happened to your first wife before I can answer your question. Clara Whitmore. She sealed it and bribed a stable boy to deliver it to the Ashford Inn. The response came the next morning. Miss Whitmore, a fair request. Meet me at the old bridge by the river at 2 o'clock. Come alone. R. Hale. Clara stared at the note. Meeting a man, a possibly dangerous man, alone and away from the manor was reckless, stupid even, but she needed answers. At 1:45, Clara slipped out of the manor. Aunt Eleanor was visiting Lady Hartwell, Vivian was in town with her dressmaker, and her uncle was in his study. No one would miss her for a few hours. The old bridge was a 15-minute walk through the woods. It had been built decades ago, before the new road went in, and now it was mostly forgotten, overgrown with moss, boards creaking underfoot. Rowan was already there, standing in the middle of the bridge, staring down at the water. Clara's steps slowed as she approached. He turned at the sound. You came. You asked me to. I asked you to come alone to an isolated location to meet a man you barely know. His mouth curved, but it wasn't quite a smile. Most women would have more sense. Most women aren't desperate enough to consider marrying that man. Fair point. He gestured to the bridge railing. Walk with me? They stood side by side, looking down at the river. The water moved fast here, dark and cold. Catherine drowned, Rowan said abruptly. In a pond much calmer than this. They found her face down in 2 feet of water. Clara's breath caught. We'd been married for 3 years, he continued, his voice flat. It was a marriage of arrangement. Our families thought we'd suit. We didn't. I'm sorry. Don't be. We weren't cruel to each other, just indifferent. She wanted a husband who'd worship her beauty and ignore her affairs. I wanted to be left alone to manage my estates. It was functional, if cold. Clara watched his profile. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the water. 2 weeks before she died, we attended a ball. Catherine had been drinking. She did that more and more toward the end. She made a scene, accused me of being a terrible husband in front of half of London society. I got angry. We argued, publicly. That's not unusual, Clara said quietly. Married couples argue. Not like that. Not where everyone could see the cracks. As Rowan's hands gripped the railing. When she died, people remembered that argument. They whispered. Some still do. Do you know what happened? How she actually died? The official story is that she went walking at night, something she did when she was upset or restless. The pond has a stone edge. The theory is she slipped, hit her head, fell in, too disoriented to save herself. And the unofficial story? Rowan was quiet for a long moment. The unofficial story is that I killed her, either directly or by driving her to such despair that she took her own life. Clara's stomach twisted. Did you? He turned to look at her then, and his eyes were raw. No, but I didn't save her either. I was in my study when it happened. If I'd been paying attention, if I'd noticed she was spiraling, maybe I could have prevented it. You can't blame yourself for... Can't I? His laugh was bitter. We'd had another argument that evening. She wanted to go to Paris. I refused. I had business commitments I couldn't leave. She called me heartless. I told her she was being dramatic. Those were the last words we ever spoke to each other. Clara's throat tightened. So that's the truth, son, Rowan said. I didn't love Catherine. I didn't kill her. But I failed her as a husband, and she died alone and unhappy, and I have to live with that. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of rushing water. Why are you telling me this? Clara finally asked. Because you asked for the truth. And because if you're going to marry me, you need to understand what you're walking into. There will be whispers. Some people will never believe I'm innocent. You'll be associated with that. Clara looked down at the water, dark and cold and fast-moving. I believe you, she heard herself say. Rowan's head snapped toward her. Why? Because you didn't have to tell me any of this. You could have given me a sanitized version or avoided the question entirely. But you didn't. She met his eyes. You kept your promise. You were honest. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or relief. That doesn't mean I've made a decision about your proposal, Clara added quickly. I still need time. Of course, Rowan nodded. But while you're thinking, consider this. The world will judge you no matter what you do. Stay here, and they'll pity you. Marry me, and they'll whisper about you. At least if you marry me, you'll have the power to tell them all to go to hell. Clara felt a laugh bubble up, sharp and unexpected. That's your argument? The ability to tell society to go to hell? It's an underrated freedom. They stood there for another moment, the bridge creaking beneath their feet. I should get back, Clara said, before someone notices I'm gone. I'll walk you to the edge of the woods. They walked in silence, the path narrow enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. Clara was acutely aware of him, his height, his presence, the way he moved like someone used to command. At the tree line, he stopped. Clara. The use of her first name sent a small shock through her. Whatever you decide, I meant what I said. You were never meant to be small. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Then he was walking back toward the bridge, leaving her alone at the edge of the woods. Clara stood there for a long moment before heading back to the manor. Her mind churned the entire way. She believed him about Catherine, but belief wasn't the same as certainty, and marriage was permanent. Still, what were her other options? Stay here and slowly suffocate under Aunt Eleanor's control. Hope for some other marriage proposal that would never come because she had no dowry and no connections and no presence. Or take a risk on a man who promised honesty in a world built on lies. By the time she reached the manor, Clara had made her decision. She just needed one more night to be absolutely sure. That night, Vivian cornered her before dinner. You've been sneaking around, Vivian said, blocking the hallway. Where were you this afternoon? Walking. Liar. The stable boy saw you head toward the old bridge. Vivian's eyes glittered. Were you meeting someone? Clara's pulse jumped. That's none of your business. It is when it affects my reputation. Vivian stepped closer. If you're having some sordid affair, I'm not having an affair. Then what? Because you've been acting strange ever since the party, and the Duke's visit. Vivian's expression sharpened. Is it him? Are you meeting the Duke? Clara's silence was answer enough. Vivian laughed, high and cruel. Oh, this is perfect. You actually think he's interested in you. The poor little charity case, imagining a Duke would want her. Stop it. Why would he want you? Clara, you have nothing. No money, no family, no beauty. What could you possibly offer him? The words hit like physical blows, each one landing in places that already ached. You're right, Clara said quietly. I have nothing. Vivian's smile turned triumphant. But maybe, Clara continued, her voice steadier now, that's exactly why he wants me. Because I don't need him to perform. I don't need him to be anything other than what he is. Vivian's smile faltered. And maybe, Clara said, the anger finally breaking through, just maybe, I'm tired of you telling me what I'm worth. She pushed past Vivian and walked away, her heart hammering. Behind her, Vivian called out, Mother will never allow it. Whatever you think is happening, it won't. Clara didn't respond, just kept walking. In her room, she sat at her small writing desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Her hand only shook a little as she wrote, Your Grace, my answer is yes. Clara Whitmore. She sealed the letter before she could second-guess herself. Tomorrow, she'd send it. Tomorrow, she'd set her life on a completely different path. Tonight, she sat in her small, cold room and imagined what freedom might feel like. The next morning, Clara woke to chaos. Shouting echoed through the manor, doors slammed, footsteps thundered on the stairs. Clara threw on a dressing gown and opened her door. Aunt Eleanor stood in the hallway, her face white with fury. Uncle Richard was beside her, looking apoplectic. What's happening? Clara asked. Eleanor's eyes locked on her. You. This is your doing. Clara's stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Don't play innocent. Eleanor thrust a letter at her. He sent a formal proposal to your uncle, asking for your hand in marriage. Clara took the letter with numb fingers. It was from Rowan. Short, formal, proper, requesting permission to marry Clara Whitmore. I don't understand, Uncle Richard said, his voice tight. Why would the Duke of Thornwick want to marry her? It's a mistake, Eleanor snapped. It has to be, or... Her eyes narrowed. What did you do? What did you say to him? Nothing, Clara said. We just talked. Nobody just talks to a duke and ends up with a marriage proposal. Eleanor grabbed Clara's arm, her fingers digging in. Tell me the truth. Did you throw yourself at him? Did you compromise yourself somehow? No, I would never. Then why? Eleanor's voice rose. Why would he possibly want you? Because I'm honest. Because I don't perform. Because he's as tired of this world as I am. But Clara didn't say any of that, just stood there, clutching the letter, feeling the walls of her old life cracking around her. I've already sent a reply declining, Uncle Richard said. This is absurd. The Duke must be... He paused, uncomfortable. Unwell. Or testing us somehow. Either way, it's inappropriate. Clara's breath stopped. You declined? Of course I declined. You're not suitable for a duke. The very idea is... You had no right. The words came out sharp, surprising everyone, including Clara herself. He asked for my hand. Not yours to give away. Mine. Eleanor's face flushed. How dare you? I'm 23 years old, Clara continued, her voice shaking but steady. Old enough to make my own decisions. You are a child living under our roof, on our charity, Uncle Richard said coldly. You'll do as you're told. Then I'll leave. The silence that followed was deafening. What did you say? Eleanor whispered. Clara's heart pounded so hard she could hear it, but she'd come this far. I said I'll leave. I'll find somewhere else to live. But I won't let you make this decision for me. Uncle Richard laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. Leave? And go where? You have no money, no prospects, no one who wants you. Each word was designed to hurt, and it worked. But Clara thought of Rowan on the bridge, telling her about Catherine, about failure and guilt and honesty, about choosing truth over performance. Someone wants me, she said quietly, even if you can't understand why. Eleanor moved fast, grabbed Clara's shoulders and shook her. Listen to me, you ungrateful little fool. That man is dangerous. His wife died under suspicious circumstances. If you marry him, you could end up the same way. Or, Clara said, meeting her aunt's eyes, I could end up free. Eleanor's hands dropped. She stared at Clara like she was looking at a stranger. You've lost your mind, she breathed. Maybe Clara had. Maybe this whole thing was insane, but she'd made her choice. I'll be in my room, Clara said. When the Duke calls, and he will call, I'd like to speak with him. She turned and walked away, half expecting someone to stop her. No one did. In her room, Clara pressed her back against the door and tried to breathe. She'd just defied her aunt and uncle, declared her intention to leave, chosen a dangerous path over a safe one. There was no going back now. 3 hours later, hoofbeats thundered up the drive. Clara watched from her window as Rowan Hale dismounted, his face set in hard lines. He'd received Uncle Richard's rejection, and he'd come anyway. Clara heard the raised voices from downstairs, her uncle's bluster, Rowan's cold, cutting responses. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. This was a battle. Then footsteps on the stairs. A knock at her door. The housekeeper's voice. Miss Clara, the Duke is demanding to see you. Clara opened the door. Take me to him. The drawing room felt like a battlefield. Uncle Richard stood by the fireplace, red-faced and furious. Aunt Eleanor sat rigidly on the settee. Vivienne watched from the doorway, eyes wide. And Rowan stood in the center of the room like a storm given human form. His eyes found Clara's the moment she entered. Miss Whitmore, he said, his voice formal but his gaze intense. Your uncle tells me you're not interested in my proposal. My uncle is wrong. Uncle Richard made a strangled sound. Clara, you don't know what you're... I know exactly what I'm saying. Clara moved further into the room, her hands clasped to hide their shaking. And I want to hear the Duke's proposal directly. Rowan's mouth curved, just barely. I believe I made myself clear in my letter to your uncle. But if you'd like me to repeat it... He looked at Clara, ignoring everyone else in the room. I'm asking you to marry me. Not because you're convenient or appropriate or what anyone expects, but because you're honest in a dishonest world. And I need that. I need you. The silence was absolute. Then Uncle Richard, this is madness. I forbid it. Well, you can't forbid it, Rowan said, his tone ice cold. She's of age. The law doesn't require your permission. But decency. Decency. Rowan's laugh was sharp. You want to lecture me about decency? You who've kept your niece as an unpaid servant for 11 years? Who've let your wife and daughter treat her like she's worthless? Eleanor stood up, trembling with rage. How dare you come into our home? Your home that you've made into a prison for her. Rowan's eyes were merciless. Don't pretend this is about protecting Clara. This is about control, about keeping her small enough that she can't escape you. The words hung in the air like weapons. Clara, Uncle Richard said, his voice tight, if you leave this house with him, you'll have nothing. No family, no support, no one to turn to when this goes wrong. Clara looked at her uncle, at her aunt, at Vivian in the doorway, at the people who'd sheltered her and slowly suffocated her for over a decade. I already have nothing here, she said. At least with him, I'll have a choice. She turned to Rowan. I accept your proposal, Your Grace. His eyes held hers for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp and certain. We'll be married within the month, he said. I'll make the arrangements. You can't do this, Eleanor whispered. Clara, please, think about what you're throwing away. But Clara was already moving toward the door, toward Rowan, toward a future she couldn't see but had chosen anyway. Behind her, Vivian's voice, she'll regret this. When she's dead in a pond somewhere, she'll regret it. Clara didn't turn around. She walked out of Ashford Manor beside the Duke of Thornwick, leaving her old life in pieces behind her. The carriage lurched forward, wheels crunching over gravel. Clara sat rigid against the velvet seat, watching Ashford Manor shrink through the window until it disappeared behind a stand of trees. Gone. Just like that. 11 years compressed into a 15-minute argument and a walk out the door. Are you going to be sick? Rowan asked. Clara turned to look at him. He sat across from her, one arm draped along the window frame, studying her with those unsettling gray eyes. No, she said. Why? You look like you might be. Clara pressed a hand to her stomach. He wasn't wrong. Her insides were churning like she'd swallowed rocks. I'm fine. You just burned every bridge you had. I know. Your family will never forgive this. I know that too. Clara's voice came out sharper than intended. Why are you telling me things I already know? Rowan's mouth curved slightly. Because most people don't actually understand what they've done until after. I wanted to make sure you did. Well, I do, so you can stop testing me. I wasn't... He paused, then nodded. Fair enough. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the clatter of hooves and the creak of the carriage. Clara pulled her shawl tighter. She hadn't brought anything with her. No clothes, no books, nothing. Just walked out wearing what she had on. We're going to Thornwick Estate, Rowan said. It's about 3 hours north. We'll stop at an inn halfway to change horses and get you something to eat. I'm not hungry. You will be. Clara looked out the window again. The countryside rolled past, fields giving way to forest, the sky heavy with clouds that promised rain. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now you rest. Tomorrow we'll start making arrangements. The banns need to be posted, paperwork filed. I have a solicitor who can expedite things, but it'll still take a few weeks. And in the meantime, you'll stay at Thornwick, with a chaperone before you ask. My housekeeper, Mrs. Davison, is formidable enough to satisfy even the strictest gossips. Clara twisted her hands in her lap. They'll talk anyway. They always do. Rowan leaned back against the seat. Let them. Words can't actually hurt you unless you give them permission. That's easy to say when you're a duke. Is it? His voice went cold. Ask me how it felt when half of London society whispered that I'd murdered my wife. Ask me if words have power. Clara's breath caught. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... I know what you meant, and you're right. Being a duke provides certain protections, but it doesn't make you immune to cruelty. He looked at her directly. The difference is that I stopped caring what they thought. You'll need to learn to do the same. The carriage hit a rut, throwing Clara sideways. Rowan's hand shot out, steadying her before she could slam into the door. Careful, he said. His hand was still on her arm, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. Clara became suddenly, acutely aware of how small the carriage was, how close they were sitting. Rowan seemed to realize it at the same moment. He pulled his hand back. Sorry. It's fine. Another silence. This one felt different, charged somehow. Clara cleared her throat. Can I ask you something? You just did. Can I ask you something else then? The corner of his mouth twitched. Go ahead. Why did you really propose to me? And don't say it's because I'm honest. Half of England is honest. You could have your pick of honest women. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the passing trees. No, he said finally. I couldn't. What do you mean? Honest women from good families don't marry widowers with dark reputations. Their fathers won't allow it. And the ones who would marry me despite the gossip, they're not actually honest. They're willing to overlook murder rumors for a title and fortune. That's different. Clara absorbed this. So I'm your only option. You say that like it's an insult, isn't it? No. Rowan looked at her directly. You're the only woman I've met in 3 years who looked at me like I was a person instead of a title or a scandal. That's not settling, Clara. That's finding something rare. The words landed somewhere in Clara's chest, warm and unsettling. I still don't know you, she said quietly. I know. That's why we have time before the wedding, to learn. And if we learn we can't stand each other, then we'll have an honest marriage where we can't stand each other, still better than a dishonest one where we pretend. Clara almost laughed. The absurdity of it, planning for mutual dislike before they'd even had a real conversation. You're very strange, she said, so I've been told. The inn appeared an hour later, a weathered building with a faded sign reading The Spotted Hart. Rowan helped Clara down from the carriage, his hand firm on her elbow. Inside, the innkeeper's wife fussed over them, clearly flustered by unexpected nobility. Your Grace, we weren't expecting, that is, we don't have a private room and hot food, Rowan said. That's all we need. They were shown to a small parlor upstairs. Clara sank into a chair by the fire, suddenly exhausted. Rowan stood by the window, looking out. I need to send word ahead to Thornwick. Let the staff know you're coming. What will you tell them? That I'm bringing home my fiancé. They'll have questions. They're paid not to ask them. He turned from the window. But Mrs. Davison will want to know what happened. She was fond of Catherine. She'll be protective. Clara's stomach tightened. Should I be worried? About Mrs. Davison? No. She's stern but fair, and she hates dishonesty more than anything else. He paused. Actually, you'll probably get along. The food arrived. Bread, cheese, cold chicken, ale. Clara picked at it while Rowan wrote his letter. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating. The bread was fresh, the chicken still had flavor. At Ashford Manor, she'd gotten used to eating whatever was left over after everyone else had finished. Better? Rowan asked, watching her. Clara nodded, her mouth full. Good. We still have 2 hours of travel ahead. Those 2 hours passed in relative silence. Clara dozed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She woke when the carriage slowed, turning onto a tree-lined drive. We're here, Rowan said. Clara sat up, peering out the window. Thornwick Estate rose before them like something from a storybook, all gray stone and tall windows surrounded by manicured grounds that stretched toward dark woods in the distance. It was beautiful. It was imposing. It was terrifying. It's bigger than I expected, Clara said. Most people say that. The carriage stopped. Rowan got out first, then offered Clara his hand. She took it, stepping down onto gravel, staring up at the house. The front door opened. A woman emerged, tall, gray-haired, dressed in severe black. Her eyes swept over Clara with the thoroughness of someone conducting an inventory. "Mrs. Davison," Rowan said. "This is Miss Clara Whitmore, my fiancée." Mrs. Davison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Miss Whitmore, welcome to Thornwick." "Thank you," Clara managed. "I've prepared the blue room for her," Mrs. Davison said to Rowan, "and taken the liberty of asking the dressmaker to call tomorrow." "Good." Mrs. Davison's gaze returned to Clara. "You'll want to rest, I imagine. It's been a trying day." It wasn't a question. Clara nodded anyway. "This way, then." Clara followed Mrs. Davison inside, acutely aware of Rowan behind her. The entrance hall was massive, marble floors, high ceilings, a staircase that curved up to the second floor. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Hales staring down with varying degrees of severity. They climbed the stairs in silence. The blue room, when Mrs. Davison opened the door, was larger than Clara's entire bedroom at Ashford Manor. A four-poster bed dominated the space, draped in blue silk. Windows overlooked the gardens. "The washing room is through there," Mrs. Davison said, pointing. "I'll have hot water brought up. Dinner is at 7, but if you'd prefer a tray in your room, I'll come down," Clara said quickly. The thought of eating alone in this enormous room was worse than facing whatever awaited her at dinner. Mrs. Davison nodded. "Very well. I'll send Mary up to help you change." "I don't have anything to change into." A pause. Mrs. Davison's eyes sharpened. "You came with nothing." "I left rather suddenly." "I see." Mrs. Davison's tone gave nothing away. "I'll find you something suitable. Mary will be up shortly." She left, closing the door behind her. Clara stood in the middle of the blue room and tried to breathe. This was real. She was actually here, in a duke's house, about to marry a man she barely knew. What had she done? A knock at the door. A young maid entered, Mary presumably, carrying a gown over her arm. "Mrs. Davison sent this, miss. It might be a bit big, but it'll do for tonight." The gown was simple but well made, dark green wool with modest lacing. Clara let Mary help her into it. It was too big through the bodice, too long in the hem, but Mary pinned it quickly. "There," Mary said. "You look proper, at least." "Thank you." Mary hesitated. "Miss, if you don't mind my saying, you're very brave." Clara looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "Coming here, after everything that happened with the last Duchess." Mary's eyes were wide, earnest. "People say this house is cursed." "Mary!" Mrs. Davison's voice cracked like a whip from the doorway. "That's enough. Get downstairs." Mary fled. Mrs. Davison stepped inside, closing the door. She studied Clara with an intensity that made Clara want to shrink. "You'll hear stories," Mrs. Davison said. "The staff gossip, the villagers gossip. I can't stop that, but I can tell you the truth if you want it." Clara's throat tightened. "What truth?" "That the Duke is a good man trapped in bad circumstances. That his first marriage was a mistake from the beginning, but he tried to make it work. That when the Duchess died, he grieved, not for what they had, but for what they never could be." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're going to marry him, and you should know what you're walking into." Mrs. Davison's expression softened, just barely. "The Duke hasn't brought a woman to this house in 3 years. The fact that he brought you, that means something. Or it means he's desperate. The Duke of Thornwick doesn't do anything out of desperation." Mrs. Davison moved toward the door. "Dinner is in an hour. I'll have Mary come back to fetch you." After she left, Clara sank onto the edge of the massive bed. This house, these people, this life, it was all too much. Too big. Too strange. But there was no going back. Dinner was a quiet affair. Clara sat at one end of a long table, Rowan at the other, with enough space between them to park a carriage. The food was excellent. Roast beef, potatoes, vegetables she couldn't name. Clara ate mechanically, aware of Rowan watching her. "You're quiet," he said finally. "I'm thinking. About? Whether I've made a terrible mistake." Rowan set down his fork. "Have you?" "I don't know yet." "Fair enough. He picked up his wine glass. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice, but I'm biased. Because you want a wife. Because I want you to have a chance at something better than what you had. Clara looked at him across the expanse of polished wood. You don't even know what I had. I saw enough. Your aunt's disdain, your cousin's cruelty, your uncle's indifference. Rowan's voice was matter of fact. That's not a home. That's a prison with better furniture. He wasn't wrong, but hearing it stated so baldly made Clara's chest tight. What was your home like? She asked, before Catherine. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Cold. My father was difficult, demanding. Nothing was ever good enough. My mother died when I was 12. After that, it was just me and my brother and a man who saw us as extensions of his legacy instead of actual children. I'm sorry. Don't be. It made me who I am. He paused. Whether that's a good thing is debatable. Clara almost smiled. You're very hard on yourself. Someone has to be. They finished dinner in silence. Afterward, Rowan showed Clara the library, a massive room lined with books from floor to ceiling. You're welcome to anything here, he said. I know you like to read. I saw you in the library at Ashford Manor that day. Clara stared at him. You were watching me? I was looking for your uncle. You were sitting by the window, completely absorbed in whatever you were reading. You didn't even notice me come in. What was I reading? I couldn't see the title, but the way you were holding it, like it was the only real thing in the world, I remember thinking that was how I used to read, before everything became about duty and obligation. Something in Clara's chest loosened. You can still read that way. Can I? Why not? Rowan looked around the library at the thousands of books surrounding them. I don't know. I suppose I forgot how. Then I'll teach you, Clara said. The words came out before she'd thought them through. Rowan's eyes met hers. Will you? If you want. I want. The moment stretched between them, not quite comfortable, but not uncomfortable either. Something else. Something Clara didn't have a name for. I should let you rest, Rowan said finally. It's been a long day. Clara nodded, but as she turned to leave, she paused. Rowan? Boo? It was the first time she'd used his first name. He noticed. She could see it in the way his expression shifted. Yes? Thank you for getting me out of there. You got yourself out. I just provided the carriage. Clara shook her head. You gave me a choice. That's more than anyone else ever did. She left before he could respond, making her way back to the blue room with Mary's help. That night, Clara lay in the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling. The sheets were softer than anything she'd ever felt. The room was warm. The house was quiet. She should feel relieved, safe. Instead, she felt terrified, because this, all of this, could be taken away just as easily as it had been given. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. The dressmaker came and measured Clara for a trousseau. The solicitor arrived with papers to sign. Rowan's brother Thomas visited, a younger, softer version of Rowan, who looked at Clara with barely concealed suspicion. You're actually going through with this, Thomas said on his second day at Thornwick. Yes, Clara replied. They were in the garden, ostensibly taking a walk. In reality, Thomas was interrogating her while Rowan handled business in his study. Why? Clara stopped walking. Why what? Why marry my brother? He's difficult, cold, and there are rumors. I know about the rumors. And they don't concern you? Should they? Thomas studied her. Most women would be terrified. I am terrified, Clara said honestly. But not of Rowan. Then of what? Of failing, of not being what he needs, of discovering I made a mistake. She looked at Thomas directly. But staying at Ashford Manor? That wasn't living. That was just existing. At least this way I get to choose. Something in Thomas's expression shifted. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, what's the point? Thomas was quiet for a moment, then, he's been different since you came. Lighter, somehow. I haven't seen him like this since before. He stopped. Before Catherine died? Yes. Thomas looked uncomfortable. He blames himself, for not saving her. I know. Do you think he could have? Clara considered this. I don't know, but I think he's been punishing himself for 3 years for something that might not have been his fault. That's not justice. That's just suffering. Thomas smiled, a real smile, not the polite mask he'd been wearing. You're stranger than I expected. Everyone keeps saying that. Take it as a compliment. That evening, Rowan summoned Clara to his study. The banns have been posted, he said. We can be married 2 weeks from Saturday. Clara's heart jumped. That soon? Is it too soon? I don't know, maybe. She twisted her hands together. What if we're making a mistake? Rowan set down his pen. Come here. Clara crossed to his desk. He stood, moving around it to face her. Look at me, he said. She did. Are you unhappy here? No. Have I done anything to make you feel unsafe? No. Then what are you afraid of? Claire's throat tightened. That you'll regret this. That you'll look at me in a year and wonder why you ever thought this would work. Rowan's hand came up, cupping her face gently. The gesture surprised them both. Clara could see it in his eyes, the way he'd moved without thinking. I won't, he said quietly. I know what I want, Clara. And I want this. I want you. But you don't love me. No, not yet. His thumb brushed her cheek. But I could. And that's more than I had with Catherine. More than I thought I'd ever have again. Clara's eyes burned. She blinked hard. Tell me you want this too, Rowan said. Not because you have no other options, not because you're desperate, but because you actually want to build something here. Did she? Clara thought about Ashford Manor, the cold rooms, the cruel words, the constant reminder that she didn't belong. Then she thought about Thornwick, the library full of books, Mrs. Davison's stern kindness, Mary's shy smiles, Rowan's honesty. I want this, she whispered. I'm terrified, but I want it. Rowan's hand dropped. Good. Then we'll face the terror together. The wedding was set for the last Saturday in November. The ceremony would be small, just immediate family and close friends. Rowan had wanted it that way, and Clara had no one to invite anyway. Your aunt sent a letter, Mrs. Davison said one morning, handing Clara an envelope. Clara stared at it like it might bite. She hadn't heard from anyone at Ashford Manor since she'd left. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Aunt Eleanor's precise handwriting. Clara, you have made your choice. I hope you understand the consequences. When this ends badly, and it will, do not expect to return here. You are no longer welcome in this family. Eleanor Clara read it twice, then fed it to the fire. Bad news? Mrs. Davison asked. No, Clara said. Just confirmation. The day before the wedding, Vivian arrived. Clara was in the drawing room when Mrs. Davison announced her. Miss Vivian Whitmore to see you. Clara's stomach dropped. What is she doing here? I don't know, miss, but she's quite insistent. Clara stood slowly. Show her in. Vivian swept into the room like she owned it, dressed in pale blue silk that probably cost more than Clara's entire trousseau. She looked around with barely concealed disdain. So this is Thornwick, she said. Impressive, if you like old drafty houses. What do you want, Vivian? Vivian's smile was sharp. Can a cousin visit before a wedding? You've never visited me before. I've never had a reason to. Vivian moved closer. Until now. Clara's hands clenched. Say what you came to say. Mother sent me. She wanted me to give you one more chance to reconsider. No. You haven't heard. I don't need to hear it. The answer is no. Vivian's expression hardened. You're making a mistake, Clara. Everyone knows what happened to his first wife. Are you really so desperate to escape that you'd risk the same fate? Get out. I'm trying to help you. No, you're not. Clara's voice shook with anger. You're here because you can't stand that I'm doing something you never could. I'm choosing my own life instead of waiting for someone to choose me. Vivian's face flushed. You think you're so brave. But you're just a fool. And when he kills you, that's enough. Rowan's voice cut through the room like a blade. Both women spun around. He stood in the doorway, his face carved from ice. Miss Whitmore, he said to Vivian, you're not welcome here. Leave, now. Vivian's chin lifted. Or what? Or I'll have you removed. You can't. I can. This is my house, and you've insulted my fiancé under my roof. Rowan took a step forward. So I'll say it once more. Leave. Vivian looked between them, her face pale with fury. This isn't over. Yes, Rowan said coldly. It is. Vivian swept out, her silk dress rustling. They heard the front door slam moments later. Clara sank into a chair, shaking. Rowan crossed to her. Are you all right? She said you were going to kill me. I heard. Does that not bother you? It bothers me that she upset you. Rowan knelt in front of her chair. But the words themselves? I've heard worse. Let her talk. Let them all talk. Tomorrow, you'll be my wife, and they'll have no power over you anymore. Clara looked at him, at this strange, complicated man who'd offered her freedom when no one else would. I'm still afraid, she whispered. So am I. He took her hand. But we'll be afraid together. That counts for something. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Clara stood in the blue room while Mary helped her into her wedding gown, simple ivory silk with lace at the sleeves. No veil, no flowers, just the dress, and Clara's hair swept up in a style that made her look older, more serious. You're shaking, miss, Mary said softly. I know. It's natural. Every bride is nervous. But this wasn't normal wedding nerves. This was fear and hope and terror, all twisted together until Clara couldn't tell them apart. The ceremony was held in the small chapel on the Thornwick grounds. Clara walked down the aisle alone. No one to give her away. No family to witness. Just Rowan waiting at the altar, Thomas standing as witness, and Mrs. Davison watching from the front pew. The vicar spoke. Clara answered when prompted. So did Rowan. And then it was done. She was the Duchess of Thornwick, Clara Hale. The name felt foreign on her tongue. After, there was a small breakfast. Clara picked at her food while various well-wishers offered congratulations. She smiled, nodded, played the part. All the while her mind screamed, "What have you done?" Finally, mercifully, everyone left. Clara and Rowan stood in the entrance hall alone. "We should talk," Rowan said. Clara's stomach twisted. "About what?" "About tonight, about expectations." He looked uncomfortable, the first time she'd seen him truly uncertain. "I don't expect, that is, we don't have to—" "Oh." Heat flooded Clara's face. "Oh. Right. I know this isn't a normal marriage. I don't want to pressure you into anything you're not ready for." Clara nodded, relief and disappointment tangling in her chest. "Thank you. But eventually," Rowan cleared his throat, "eventually, we'll need to. For an heir." "I know. So, take whatever time you need. We're not in a rush." Clara looked at her husband. This man she barely knew, who was giving her space even now. "What about what you need?" Rowan's eyes met hers. "I need you to feel safe. Everything else can wait." That night, Clara lay alone in the blue room. Her room now, apparently, and stared at the ceiling. She was married. To a duke. To a man people thought might be a murderer. And she had no idea if she'd made the best decision of her life or the worst. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened. Footsteps. Then silence. Rowan, checking the house before bed, making sure everything was secure, making sure she was safe. Clara closed her eyes and tried to believe this would work, tried to believe she hadn't just trapped herself in a different kind of cage. The next morning she woke to screaming. Clara bolted upright, heart hammering. The screaming was coming from outside, high and terrified. She threw on a robe and ran into the hallway. Rowan was already there, pulling on his coat. "What's happening?" Clara asked. "I don't know. Stay here." "Like hell." She followed him downstairs, out the front door into the gray morning light. A crowd had gathered by the pond, servants mostly, clustered together, pointing. The same pond where Catherine had died. Clara's blood ran cold. Rowan pushed through the crowd. Clara followed, dread coiling in her stomach. And then she saw it, floating face down in the water. A body. Clara's vision tunneled. The body floated motionless, pale fabric billowing around it like seaweed. Rowan was already moving, striding into the water without hesitation. He grabbed the body, turning it over. And stopped. Not a person. A dressmaker's dummy, dressed in a woman's nightgown, weighted down with stones. The relief that crashed through Clara was immediately replaced by something colder. Someone had done this deliberately. Rowan hauled the dummy out of the water, throwing it onto the bank. His face was carved from granite. Around them, the servants whispered, eyes wide with fear. "Who found this?" Rowan's voice cut through the murmuring. A young groundskeeper stepped forward, trembling. "I did, Your Grace. I come to check the pond every morning since—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "Since the last time. I saw it floating, and I thought, it's all right, James. You did the right thing calling everyone." Rowan looked at the assembled crowd. "Did anyone see or hear anything unusual last night?" Silence, heads shaking. "This was placed here sometime after midnight," Rowan continued. "Someone entered the grounds, brought this dummy to the pond, and left it to be found. That means someone wanted to send a message." "What kind of message?" Mrs. Davison asked, her voice tight. Rowan's jaw clenched. "The obvious kind." Clara stared at the dummy, at the nightgown that could have been any woman's, at the stones designed to make it sink slowly, to be discovered exactly like this. A reenactment, a warning. "Everyone back to work," Rowan ordered. "James, Thomas, help me get this thing out of sight. Mrs. Davison, increase security around the house. No one comes or goes without my knowledge." The crowd dispersed reluctantly. Clara stood frozen, watching Rowan and his brother drag the dummy toward the groundskeeper's shed. Mrs. Davison touched her arm. "Come inside, Your Grace. You're shaking." Clara looked down. She was shaking, her whole body vibrating like a plucked string. "Who would do this?" she whispered. "Someone cruel." Mrs. Davison's voice was hard. "Someone who wants to frighten you." They succeeded. Inside, Mrs. Davison sat Clara down in the drawing room and pressed a cup of tea into her hands. Clara's fingers wrapped around the warmth, but she couldn't stop shaking. Rowan appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, his clothes still wet from the pond. "I need to speak with you," he said to Clara. "Privately." Mrs. Davison left without a word. Rowan closed the door and stood there for a moment, water dripping onto the carpet. Then he crossed to where Clara sat and knelt in front of her chair, the second time he'd done that. "Are you all right?" he asked. "No." Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Who did this, Rowan?" "I don't know, but I have suspicions." "Tell me." He was quiet for a moment. "Your cousin? Or your aunt? Someone who wants to prove that marrying me was a mistake. Someone who wants you frightened enough to leave." Clara's hands tightened on the teacup. "Vivian was here yesterday." "I know, and she made it clear she thinks I'm dangerous." Rowan's expression was grim. This is exactly the kind of vindictive cruelty I'd expect from someone like her. But how would she get onto the grounds? Past the gates? Money buys a lot of cooperation. A bribed servant, a sympathetic groundskeeper, it wouldn't be difficult. He paused. "I'm going to find out who did this, and when I do—" "Don't." Clara set down her teacup. "Don't do anything rash. That's exactly what they want. They left a body in my pond on the day after my wedding. A fake body, designed to make you look guilty, to make me look like a fool for marrying you." Clara stood up, pacing. "If you retaliate, if you go after Vivian or my aunt publicly, it just confirms what everyone already thinks, that you're violent, dangerous." Rowan stood too. "So what do you suggest? We just ignore this?" "No, we investigate quietly. We find proof. And then—" Clara stopped, an idea forming. "And then we use it." "Use it how?" Clara turned to face him. "They want me frightened. They want me to run back to Ashford Manor with my tail between my legs, proving that I made a mistake. So we do the opposite. We show everyone that I'm not afraid, that this marriage is real and strong, and nothing they do can shake it. Rowan studied her. You want to go on the offensive. I want to stop being a victim. Clara's voice hardened. I've spent my whole life being small and quiet and grateful. I'm done with that. If someone wants to come after me, after us, then let's make them regret it. Something shifted in Rowan's expression. You're serious? But completely. But he was quiet for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face, the first real smile Clara had seen from him. All right, he said. Let's fight back. The plan started small. That afternoon, Rowan sent word to every major family within 50 miles, inviting them to a dinner party at Thornwick the following Saturday. You want to throw a party? Thomas asked, incredulous. Now, after what happened this morning? Especially after what happened this morning. Rowan looked at Clara. We're going to show everyone that we're united, happy, unshakable. That's a performance, Thomas pointed out. Yes, Clara said, but this time we're choosing what role to play. We're controlling the narrative instead of letting someone else write it for us. Thomas looked between them. You two are either brilliant or completely insane. Probably both, Rowan said. The invitations went out. Clara threw herself into preparations with a ferociousness that surprised everyone, including herself. She met with the cook, planned the menu, arranged the flowers, chose the wine. She worked alongside Mrs. Davison like they were generals planning a campaign. You're enjoying this, Mrs. Davison observed on the third day. Clara paused, arranging roses in a crystal vase. I am. Is that wrong? Not at all. It's good to see you fighting instead of hiding. I've been hiding my whole life. I'm tired of it. That evening, Clara found Rowan in his study, surrounded by papers. I hired an investigator, he said without looking up. Someone discreet. He's going to look into who might have placed that dummy in the pond. Clara sat down across from him. And he's already found something interesting. 2 of the groundskeepers received unexpected payments last week, large enough to be suspicious. From who? That's what we're trying to determine. Rowan finally looked up. But one of them was seen in the village with a woman matching your cousin's description. Clara's stomach tightened. So it was Vivian. Probably, but we need proof before we can act. What happens when we get proof? Rowan's smile was sharp. Then we decide how public we want to make her humiliation. 3 days before the dinner party, a letter arrived. Clara recognized the handwriting immediately. Aunt Eleanor. She opened it in the library, Rowan standing nearby. Clara, I've heard about your upcoming social event. Please know that your uncle and I will not be attending. We cannot, in good conscience, support a union we believe to be dangerous and ill-advised. However, I feel obligated to warn you, people are talking, about the incident at the pond, about your hasty marriage, about the Duke's history. You still have a chance to extract yourself from this situation with some dignity intact. Come home. We will find a way to annul the marriage quietly. You can resume your life here. This is your last opportunity. Eleanor. Clara read it twice, then handed it to Rowan. He scanned it quickly, his jaw tightening. She's offering you an escape. She's offering me a cage. Clara took the letter back. She wants me to prove her right, that I'm too weak to survive outside her control. What are you going to do? Clara walked to the fireplace and fed the letter to the flames. I'm going to prove her wrong. The night before the dinner party, Clara stood in front of her mirror while Mary helped her into the gown they'd chosen. Deep burgundy silk that made her skin glow, with a neckline that was daring without being scandalous. You look beautiful, Your Grace, Mary said softly. Clara barely recognized herself. The woman in the mirror looked confident, powerful. Nothing like the girl who'd cowered in the corners at Ashford Manor. Thank you, Mary. A knock at the door. Rowan's voice. May I come in? Mary left, giving Clara a knowing smile. Rowan entered, stopping when he saw her. For a long moment, he just stared. What? Clara asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing, you just... He cleared his throat. You look different. Different good or different bad? Different like you've finally stopped hiding. He moved closer. I brought you something. He held out a velvet box. Inside was a necklace, sapphires and diamonds that caught the candlelight. It was my mother's, Rowan said. I want you to wear it tomorrow. Clara's breath caught. Rowan, I can't. You can. You're my wife, my duchess. These belong to you now. He lifted the necklace from the box. May I? Clara nodded, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin, sending shivers down her spine. There, he said softly, his hands resting on her shoulders. Perfect. Clara looked at their reflection in the mirror, her in burgundy silk, him in evening clothes, the necklace glittering at her throat. They looked like a couple, a real couple. Are you ready for tomorrow? Rowan asked. No, Clara said honestly. But I'm doing it anyway. His hands tightened on her shoulders briefly, then released. That's all that matters. The dinner party arrived like a storm. By 6 o'clock, carriages were rolling up the drive, depositing guests in glittering evening wear. Clara stood at the entrance with Rowan, greeting each arrival with practiced smiles. Lord and Lady Pemberton arrived, Vivian's future in-laws. They looked at Clara with barely concealed curiosity. Your Grace, Lady Pemberton said, how unexpected to receive your invitation. We wanted to celebrate our marriage properly, Clara replied smoothly. Share our happiness with our neighbors. How lovely. Lady Pemberton's tone suggested it was anything but. More arrivals, the Hartwells, the Blackwoods, the Cavendishes, all the families who'd whispered about Rowan after Catherine's death, who'd speculated about whether he was a murderer, all of them watching Clara like she was a curiosity or a fool. The dinner itself was a masterpiece. Course after course of expertly prepared food, wine flowing freely, conversation buzzing around the long table. Clara sat at one end, Rowan at the other, playing their parts perfectly. But halfway through the main course, Lady Hartwell cleared her throat. Forgive me for asking, Your Grace, she said to Clara, but aren't you concerned about the unfortunate precedent? The table went quiet. I'm not sure I understand, Clara said, though she understood perfectly. Well, Lady Hartwell shifted uncomfortably. The previous Duchess. The tragedy at the pond. Some might think it unwise to what? Clara's voice was pleasant but sharp. To marry a man whose wife died in an accident? Should all widowers remain unmarried forever? That seems rather cruel. Of course not, but... Or perhaps you're suggesting my husband had something to do with Catherine's death. Clara set down her fork. Is that what you're implying? Lady Hartwell's face flushed. I wouldn't presume... Good, because that would be slander. Clara smiled. And I'd hate to think our guests would spread such vicious rumors. The silence was absolute. Then Rowan's voice from the other end of the table. My wife makes an excellent point. Rumors are cheap. Truth requires evidence. If anyone here has evidence of wrongdoing, I invite them to present it. Otherwise, his eyes swept the table. I suggest we focus on more pleasant conversation. The tension broke. Conversation resumed more cautiously now. Clara caught Rowan's eye across the table. He gave her the smallest nod. They'd drawn first blood. After dinner, the guests moved to the drawing room for cards and conversation. Clara circulated, playing the perfect hostess, all while listening for useful information. Heard the investigator found nothing suspicious. Seems genuinely happy, doesn't she? Perhaps we were wrong to assume. Clara was refilling her wine glass when she heard Vivian's name. Saw Miss Whitmore in the village last week. She was meeting with someone. A man, rough-looking. Clara's pulse jumped. She moved closer to the two women talking. Do you think she's having an affair? One whispered. Before her wedding to Lord Pemberton? Scandalous. Clara filed that away. Not useful yet, but potentially interesting. The party wound down around midnight. Guests departed with promises to reciprocate invitations to call soon. Several women who'd been coldest at the beginning were noticeably warmer by the end. Finally, blessedly, the last carriage pulled away. Clara and Rowan stood in the entrance hall, alone. We did it, Clara said. You did it. You were magnificent. Clara laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. I thought I was going to vomit when Lady Hartwell started asking about Catherine. But you didn't. You stood your ground. Rowan moved closer. You made them question themselves instead of us. That's power, Clara. She looked up at him. Is this what it feels like? To fight back? Yes. Do you like it? Clara considered this. Yes, I really do. Something passed between them, heat and recognition, and something else Clara couldn't name. Rowan's hand came up, cupping her face like he had once before. You're not the same woman I met at that party. Neither are you, Clara whispered. The same man, I mean. No? No. You smile now, sometimes. His mouth curved. Your influence. The space between them felt charged. His heart hammered against her ribs. Clara, Rowan said softly, I want... A crash from upstairs. They both jumped apart. What was that? Clara asked. Rowan was already moving toward the stairs. Stay here. Not a chance. They climbed the stairs together. The sound had come from the blue room, Clara's room. Rowan pushed open the door. The room was destroyed. Drawers pulled out, clothes scattered, furniture overturned. And on the mirror, written in what looked like blood, Leave before you end up like her, like her. Clara's breath stopped. Rowan crossed to the mirror, touching the substance. Paint, red paint. Someone was in my room. Clara's voice shook. While we were downstairs during the party. Which means it was one of the guests, or someone they brought with them. Rowan's expression was murderous. This ends now. Wait. Clara grabbed his arm. Don't you see this is perfect? He stared at her. Perfect? They're getting desperate, sloppy. First the dummy, now this. They're escalating because the subtle approach didn't work. Clara moved to the window, looking down at the darkened grounds. And whoever did this had to pass multiple servants to get up here. Someone saw something. Rowan's eyes narrowed. You want to use this. I want to catch them. Actually catch them, with proof we can use. Clara turned to face him. Can your investigator question the staff? Find out who was where during the party? Yes. Then let's do it. Let's find out exactly who's been trying to terrorize me. Clara's hands clenched. And then let's destroy them. The next morning, Rowan's investigator, a thin man named Morrison with sharp eyes, questioned every servant who'd been working during the party. Clara sat in on the interviews, watching faces, listening for inconsistencies. Mary was visibly distressed. I saw someone on the stairs during dinner. I thought it was one of the guests stepping out for air, so I didn't say anything. Can you describe them? Morrison asked. Female, wearing blue silk, blonde hair. Clara's blood ran cold. What shade of blue? Pale blue, sky blue. Mary's eyes widened. Like what Miss Vivian was wearing at the engagement party. I saw her in the society papers. But Vivian wasn't at the dinner party, Clara said. No, Rowan agreed. But someone wearing her signature color was. Someone who wanted to be seen, to be remembered, but not identified. Morrison made notes. I'll need to check the guest list against who actually arrived. See if anyone brought an uninvited companion. The answer came that evening. Lord Pemberton's cousin, Morrison reported. Lady Alice Pemberton. She arrived with the family party but separated from them during dinner. Claims she had a headache and was resting in an empty room. Can we prove otherwise? Rowan asked. One of the footmen saw her coming down from the second floor just before dessert was served. She was adjusting her gloves like she'd just put them back on. Clara's mind raced. So Vivian couldn't come herself, too obvious. But she convinced her future cousin-in-law to do it for her. Why would Lady Alice agree? Morrison asked. Money, loyalty to Vivian. Maybe she genuinely believes I'm in danger and was trying to scare me away. Clara shook her head. The why doesn't matter as much as the what. We have proof that someone vandalized my room during our party. What do you want to do with this information? Rowan asked. Clara thought about it, about Aunt Eleanor's letter. About Vivian's cruel smile, about 11 years of being told she didn't matter. I want to make them face consequences, she said. Real ones, Public ones. Rowan's smile was sharp. I was hoping you'd say that. The letter Clara wrote to Lord Pemberton was a masterpiece of controlled fury. Lord Pemberton, it has come to my attention that your cousin, Lady Alice Pemberton, was responsible for vandalizing my private rooms during a dinner party at Thornwick Estate. We have multiple witnesses placing her on the second floor during the time of the incident, as well as evidence of her involvement. I am writing to you first as a courtesy to give you the opportunity to address this matter privately within your family. However, if satisfaction is not provided, I will have no choice but to pursue this matter through more public channels. I await your response. Clara Hale, Duchess of Thornwick. The response came 2 days later. Lord Pemberton arrived at Thornwick personally, his face gray with mortification. Your Grace, he said to Clara and Rowan, I cannot express how deeply I apologize for my cousin's behavior. She has confessed to everything. She claims she was acting on information from Miss Vivienne Whitmore, who convinced her that the Duchess was in danger and needed to be frightened away for her own safety. And you believe this? Clara asked. I believe my cousin is a fool who allowed herself to be manipulated. Pemberton's jaw tightened. Alice has been sent to our family estate in Scotland. She will remain there indefinitely. As for Miss Whitmore, what about her? Rowan's voice was dangerously quiet. I've ended my engagement. Clara's breath caught. You what? I cannot marry into a family that would orchestrate such cruelty. And I certainly cannot marry a woman who would manipulate others into committing crimes on her behalf. Pemberton looked genuinely distressed. I know this doesn't undo the harm done to you, Your Grace, but I hope it demonstrates that there are consequences for such behavior. After Pemberton left, Clara sank into a chair. Vivian's engagement is broken, she said quietly. Good, Rowan said. She earned it. My aunt will be furious. Let her be. Rowan knelt in front of her chair again. It was becoming a habit. Clara, listen to me. You've spent your whole life worrying about what your aunt thinks, what your uncle thinks, what they'll do to you. But you're not powerless anymore. You're a duchess. You have resources, protection. Me. Clara looked at him. This isn't over, is it? Even with Vivian's engagement broken, my aunt won't stop. Probably not, but we're ready now. And every time they come at us, we'll be stronger. Clara reached out, touching his face. The first time she'd initiated contact. When did you become an optimist? Around the time I married a woman who refuses to stay beaten down. Rowan's hand covered hers. You're changing me, Clara, for the better. Good, she whispered, because you're changing me too. The kiss happened without planning. One moment they were looking at each other, the next his mouth was on hers. Soft at first, then deeper, more urgent. Clara's hands fisted in his shirt. Rowan's arms came around her, pulling her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. I should apologize, he said. Don't you dare. He laughed, a real full laugh that transformed his entire face. All right, no apology. Good. Clara's heart was racing. We should probably talk about this. Probably. Later? Later, he agreed. That night Clara lay in bed, in a different room now, the blue room still being repaired, and thought about everything that had changed. A month ago, she'd been a charity case in a cold manner, watching her cousin prepare for marriage while she faded into the background. Now she was a duchess who'd just destroyed that same cousin's engagement and caught the people terrorizing her. Now she had power, a home, a husband who looked at her like she mattered. The knock at her door came just after midnight. Come in, Clara called. Rowan entered, still fully dressed. Can't sleep either? No. He sat on the edge of her bed. I keep thinking about what Pemberton said, that Vivienne convinced his cousin you were in danger and needed saving. She probably believes it, Clara said. In her mind, you're a murderer and I'm a fool. She was trying to protect me. By terrorizing you? People justify all kinds of cruelty when they think they're right. Clara sat up. But it doesn't matter what she believes. What matters is what we do next. What do you want to do next? Clara considered this. I want to visit Ashford Manor. Rowan's eyebrows rose. Are you sure? No, but I need to face them, properly. Not as the charity case they barely tolerated, but as myself, as the Duchess of Thornwick. Clara's jaw set. I need them to see what they lost. Rowan smiled slowly. When? Tomorrow, before they hear about Vivian's broken engagement from someone else. Clara's eyes glinted. I want to tell them myself. The carriage ride to Ashford Manor felt like traveling backward through time. Clara watched the familiar countryside roll past, Rowan sitting across from her. You're quiet, he observed. I'm preparing. For battle? Something like that. The manor looked the same. Gray stone, manicured gardens, imposing in its cold elegance. But Clara felt different approaching it now. Not smaller, not diminished. The butler who answered the door barely hid his shock. Miss Clara, Your Grace, we weren't expecting— Is my aunt receiving visitors? Clara asked, her voice cool and composed. Yes, she's in the drawing room with Miss Vivian. Perfect. Clara swept inside, Rowan at her side. The butler scurried ahead to announce them. They entered the drawing room to find Aunt Eleanor and Vivian frozen in place, teacups halfway to their mouths. Aunt Eleanor? Clara said pleasantly. Vivian, how lovely to see you both. Eleanor recovered first, setting down her cup with shaking hands. Clara, what are you doing here? I came to deliver news. I thought you should hear it from me directly. Clara smiled. Lord Pemberton has ended his engagement to Vivian. Vivian went white. That's a lie. Is it? Perhaps you should check with Lord Pemberton himself. Clara's smile didn't waver. He was quite upset to learn that his fiancée had orchestrated a campaign of terror against his future duchess. Apparently that's not the kind of connection he wants for his family. You did this, Vivian hissed. You destroyed my engagement because you're jealous. I did nothing, Clara interrupted. You destroyed your own engagement when you convinced Lady Alice to vandalize my home, when you paid servants to place that dummy in the pond, when you sent threatening letters and tried to frighten me into leaving my husband. Eleanor stood up. This is absurd. Vivian would never— We have proof, Rowan said quietly. Witnesses. Confessions. We could make this very public if we wanted to. But we won't, Clara added, because, unlike you, I don't need to destroy people to feel powerful. I just wanted you to know, both of you, that your cruelty has consequences. That I'm not the same girl you spent 11 years breaking down. Vivian's face crumpled. You've ruined everything. My engagement, my reputation. You ruined those yourself. Clara's voice was hard. I just stopped letting you ruin me too. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Aunt Eleanor, that letter you sent offering to take me back? To annul my marriage and resume my old life here? Clara looked around the drawing room, at the cold elegance, the suffocating perfection. I'd rather die than come back to this prison. I finally understand what freedom feels like, and you'll never take that from me again. Eleanor's face went purple with rage. Get out! Get out of my house! Gladly. Clara took Rowan's offered arm. We won't be returning. Consider this goodbye. They walked out of Ashford Manor together, Clara's head high, her step steady. In the carriage, Rowan looked at her. How do you feel? Clara thought about it. Lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy for years and finally put it down. No regrets? None. Rowan reached across the carriage, taking her hand. I'm proud of you. Clara squeezed his hand back. I'm proud of me too. They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Clara said, I think I'm ready. For what? For this to be a real marriage, not just a partnership or an arrangement. She looked at him directly. I want to try. To build something honest and real. With you. Rowan's expression softened. I want that too. Even though it's terrifying, especially because it's terrifying, the best things usually are. When they arrived back at Thornwick, the sun was setting, painting the gray stone gold. Clara stood looking up at it. Her home now, truly her home. Mrs. Davison met them at the door. Your Grace, a letter arrived while you were gone. Clara took it, recognizing her uncle's handwriting. She opened it there in the entrance hall. Clara, your aunt has informed me of your visit and the subsequent revelations. While I cannot condone Vivian's methods, I understand her concern for your safety. However, I recognize that you have made your choice. I will respect it, though I cannot support it. Should you ever need assistance, know that my door remains open. Richard Whitmore. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even particularly warm, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that she existed, that her choices mattered. Clara folded the letter carefully. He's trying, I think, in his way. Do you want to respond? Rowan asked. Eventually, but not yet. Clara looked at him. Right now, I just want to focus on building our life. Together. Rowan smiled, that real smile that she was seeing more and more often. I can work with that. That night, they had dinner together in the smaller dining room instead of at opposite ends of the formal table. They talked about books and politics and childhood memories. Clara learned that Rowan had wanted to be a ship's captain before duty demanded he become a duke. Rowan learned that Clara could paint but had given it up because her aunt called it frivolous. Start again, Rowan said. Paint whatever you want. I'll have a studio set up for you. You don't have to. I want to. I want you to have everything here that you couldn't have before. After dinner, they walked through the gardens as night fell. Rowan showed Clara the maze Catherine had planted, now overgrown and wild. I couldn't bear to maintain it after she died, Gis, he admitted. It felt wrong somehow. We could redesign it, Clara suggested. Make it into something new, something ours. Rowan looked at her. I'd like that. They stood in the center of the maze, surrounded by wild roses and encroaching darkness. Clara, Rowan said quietly, I need you to know. I'm falling in love with you. Clara's breath caught. You said you wouldn't, that you couldn't. I was wrong. He stepped closer. Every day you surprise me, challenge me, make me want to be better. And I realize that what I thought was impossible, actually loving someone, being loved in return, might be the most honest thing I've ever felt. Clara's eyes burned. I'm falling in love with you too. It terrifies me. Good. We can be terrified together. He kissed her again, there in the wild maze under the stars. And Clara thought this was what freedom felt like. Not the absence of fear, but the courage to feel it and choose anyway. To choose love, to choose truth, to choose herself. When they finally pulled apart, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. Come to my room tonight, he said, not because you have to, but because you want to. Clara's heart raced. I want to. Are you sure? I'm sure. They walked back to the house, hand in hand, ready to build something real together, ready to prove that broken people could heal each other, that honesty was stronger than performance, that love earned was worth more than love demanded. In the morning, Mrs. Davison found them having breakfast together in Rowan's private sitting room, Clara wearing his dressing gown, both of them laughing at some private joke. She smiled to herself and quietly closed the door. Thornwick was finally becoming a home again. 3 years passed like water finding its level, not smoothly, but inevitably, carving new paths through old stone. Clara stood at the nursery window, watching dawn break over Thornwick's grounds. Behind her, in the cradle Rowan had commissioned from a carpenter in the village, their daughter slept, 6 months old, dark-haired like her father, with eyes that promised to be the same unsettling gray. Eleanor. They'd named her Eleanor. Not after Clara's aunt. That woman had died 2 winters ago, bitter and alone, having never reconciled with anyone. No, this Eleanor was named for Rowan's mother, the woman who'd loved books and painting and had died too young to see her son become the man he was. You're up early, Rowan said from the doorway. Clara turned. He was disheveled from sleep, still in his nightshirt, and she loved him more now than she had 3 years ago. Not the desperate, terrifying love of those first months, but something deeper, steadier. Couldn't sleep, she said. I keep thinking about today. Today. The day Vivian was coming to Thornwick. It had been Thomas who'd suggested it, surprisingly. He'd run into Vivian in London, quite literally apparently, knocked her packages right out of her hands at a bookshop. They'd talked. She'd cried. He'd listened. She's different, Thomas had reported to Clara and Rowan over dinner last month. Humbled. Working as a governess for the Hartwell family, if you can believe it, Clara had nearly choked on her wine. Vivian? A governess? Apparently after the engagement fell through, no one else would have her. Her reputation was ruined. Your uncle refused to support her anymore. Said she'd brought it on herself. Thomas had looked uncomfortable. She's been supporting herself for 2 years now, teaching the Hartwell children their letters and tolerating Lady Hartwell's condescension. Clara had absorbed this information in silence. Vivian, beautiful, cruel Vivian, reduced to the same kind of dependent existence she'd once inflicted on Clara. She asked about you, Thomas had added quietly. She wanted to know if you were happy, if the Duke treated you well. I told her you were flourishing. What did she say to that? She cried, said she was glad, said she'd been wrong about everything. And now Vivian was coming here, having written a careful, humble letter asking for a chance to apologize properly. To see Clara one more time. Rowan had left the decision entirely to Clara. It's your choice. If you want to see her, we'll receive her. If you don't, I'll write back declining. Clara had thought about it for a week before deciding. Yes, she would see Vivian, not because she owed her cousin anything, but because Clara wanted to face her from a position of strength, to show her what refusing to be small had built. Now, watching the sun rise over the gardens she'd redesigned, Clara felt ready. Rowan crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. You're allowed to change your mind. I know. You don't have to forgive her. I know that too. Clara leaned back against him. But I want to see her. I need to see if the change is real or just another performance. And if it's a performance, then she leaves. And we never speak again. Clara turned in his arms. But if it's real, if she's actually grown, maybe we can find some kind of peace. Rowan kissed her forehead. You're a better person than I am. No. I just understand what it's like to be trapped by your own mistakes, to need someone to give you a chance to change. She touched his face. You gave me that chance. You never needed changing, just room to grow. Baby Eleanor made a sound from the cradle, not quite crying, just announcing her presence. Clara went to her, lifting her daughter into her arms. Good morning, little bird, she murmured. Rowan came to stand beside them, one finger captured in Eleanor's tiny fist. She has your determination, already demanding what she wants, and your stubbornness. A terrifying combination. They stood there together, the three of them, as the sun finished rising. Clara thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, frightened, uncertain, convinced she was nobody. She barely recognized that person now. Vivian arrived at 2 o'clock precisely. Clara watched from the drawing room window as the hired carriage pulled up, saw her cousin step out in a plain gray dress that was well made but clearly several years old. No jewelry, no elaborate hairstyle, just Vivian, stripped of all the ornamentation that had once defined her. She looks tired, Rowan observed, standing beside Clara. She looks human, Clara corrected. Mrs. Davison showed Vivian in. The older woman had been skeptical about this meeting, but she'd prepared tea anyway, understanding that Clara needed to do this her own way. Vivian stopped in the doorway, staring at Clara. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Vivian said, her voice barely above a whisper, "You're even more beautiful than Thomas described." Clara gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Vivian." Vivian sat, perching on the edge like she expected to be told to leave at any moment. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the paintings Clara had hung, the books scattered on side tables, the comfortable disorder that marked a home actually lived in. "Would you like tea?" Clara asked. Yes, thank you." Clara poured, her hands steady. Rowan stood by the fireplace, present but silent, letting Clara control the conversation. "You wanted to see me," Clara said. "Here I am." Vivian's hands shook as she accepted the teacup. "I wanted to apologize, properly. Not through a letter or a messenger, but face to face." "All right, apologize." Vivian flinched at the directness. Then she set down her cup and looked Clara in the eye. I was cruel to you for 11 years. I made you feel small because it made me feel big. I mocked you and belittled you and turned our aunt against you even more than she already was. And when you finally found happiness, when you found someone who saw you, I tried to destroy it because I couldn't stand that you'd escaped. Clara said nothing, just waited. I convinced myself I was protecting you. Vivienne continued, her voice breaking, that the Duke was dangerous and you were making a mistake. But the truth is, I was jealous. Furious that you'd found something real while I was stuck in an arranged marriage to a man who saw me as a decorative object. You broke off your own engagement, Clara pointed out. No, I destroyed it through my own actions. Vivienne's laugh was bitter. And I've spent 2 years paying for that, working for families who treat me the way I treated you, being dismissed and overlooked and reminded daily that I'm only there on sufferance. Good, Clara said. Vivienne's head snapped up. I'm not going to pretend you didn't earn every bit of that suffering, Clara continued. You did. You were cruel and petty, and you tried to ruin my life because you couldn't stand to see me happy. I know, Vivienne whispered, but you're here now, apologizing, working, supporting yourself instead of living off someone else's charity. And Clara studied her cousin. That takes courage, especially for someone who's never had to work before. It's been horrible, Vivienne admitted. I hate it. I hate being dependent. I hate watching other women have the life I thought I deserved. Do you hate me? No. Vivienne met Clara's eyes. I'm glad for you, truly. You deserved happiness. You always did. I was just too stupid and selfish to see it. Rowan shifted by the fireplace. What do you want from this meeting? Miss Whitmore? Vivienne looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Forgiveness, if she'll give it, or at least understanding. I know I don't deserve either, but… She turned back to Clara. I wanted you to know that I see it now, what I did to you, what I was, and I'm sorry. Clara stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the garden stretched toward the woods, the maze she and Rowan had redesigned visible in the distance. I spent 11 years being afraid of you, she said quietly. Afraid of what you'd say, what you'd do, how you'd hurt me next. Even after I left Ashford Manor, even after I'd built this life, part of me was still that scared girl, waiting for you to take it all away. Clara. But then I had Eleanor, my daughter, and I realized I don't want her to grow up afraid. I don't want her to learn that cruelty is normal or that being small is safe. Clara turned to face Vivienne. So I'm choosing to let it go. Not for you. For me. For my daughter. Vivienne's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I'm not saying we're friends, Clara clarified. I don't know if we ever could be after everything, but I'm willing to try civility, maybe even, eventually, something like family. I don't deserve… No, you don't. But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing not to carry poison anymore. Clara moved back to her chair. Tell me about your work, about the Hartwell children. Vivienne blinked, clearly surprised by the shift. Then, haltingly, she began to talk. About the 3 Hartwell children, 2 boys and a girl. About teaching them to read and watching their faces light up when they finally understood. About the strange satisfaction of earning her own money, even if it was barely enough to live on. The little girl reminds me of you, Vivienne said. Quiet. Watching everything. I try to make sure she knows she matters, that someone sees her. Something in Clara's chest loosened. That's good. They talked for another hour, not about the past, that ground had been covered, about the present instead. Clara showed Vivienne the library, the studio Rowan had built for her painting. Vivienne's eyes widened at the canvases, landscapes and portraits, some skilled, some still learning, all honest. You're talented, Vivienne said. I'm learning. Rowan hired a teacher from London. She comes twice a month. You're happy here. It wasn't quite a question, but Clara answered anyway. Yes, very happy. When it was time for Vivienne to leave, they stood in the entrance hall together. Vivienne hesitated, then said, Would it be all right if I wrote? Not often, just occasionally, to see how you're doing. Clara glanced at Rowan. He gave the smallest nod. Your choice. Yes, Clara said. You can write. Thank you. Vivian moved toward the door, then paused. Clara, I really am sorry. For all of it. I know, and I really am letting it go. After Vivian's carriage disappeared down the drive, Clara stood looking after it. You all right? Rowan asked. I am, actually. I thought I'd feel angrier or more vindicated, but I just feel... Clara searched for the word. Free. Finally. Completely free. Rowan pulled her into his arms. You're extraordinary, you know that? Clara laughed against his chest. I'm really not. You are. 3 years ago, you were terrified of your own shadow. Now you're running a household, raising a daughter, painting, managing a state business, with your help. With partnership, Rowan corrected. You don't need me to do any of those things. You choose to do them with me. That's different. Clara pulled back to look at him. We've come a long way from that terrace conversation. We have. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Do you ever regret it, choosing this? Never. You? Not once. They were interrupted by Mrs. Davison, carrying a fussing Eleanor. Someone wants her mother. Clara took her daughter, settling her against her shoulder. Eleanor's crying quieted immediately. She knows her person, Mrs. Davison said with satisfaction. Strong bond, that. Like mother, like daughter, Rowan murmured. That evening, after Eleanor was asleep and dinner was done, Clara and Rowan walked through the grounds as they often did. The maze rose around them, no longer wild but carefully maintained. A joint project they'd worked on together, redesigning it from Catherine's memorial into something new. I got a letter today, Rowan said, from my brother. Thomas? What did he want? He's courting someone. Seriously, he wanted my advice. Rowan sounded amused. Did you give it? I told him to be honest, to build something real instead of something performative. He paused. I told him to find what we have. Clara smiled. Think he will? Maybe, if he's lucky. They reached the center of the maze, where a bench sat surrounded by roses. They sat together, Clara's head on Rowan's shoulder. Do you think about Catherine? Clara asked quietly. It was a question she'd asked before over the years. The answer changed each time. Sometimes, Rowan said, less than I used to. When I do think about her, it's with sadness for what we couldn't be to each other, but not guilt anymore, not blame. What changed? You, this. He gestured at the maze around them. Building something with you showed me what marriage could be, what it should be. Catherine and I never had that. We never could have had it, even if she'd lived. We were wrong for each other from the start. Clara lifted her head to look at him. Do you think she knew that she was unhappy? Yes. I think we both knew. We just didn't know how to fix it or how to leave it. Rowan's voice was thoughtful. Maybe if we'd been braver, if we'd been honest about the failure instead of pretending, she'd still be alive. Or maybe not. I'll never know. That must be hard. Not knowing. It was. For a long time, it was unbearable. But you taught me something important. What? That I could build a new life instead of remaining trapped in the old one. That I could choose differently. Clara kissed him, soft and slow. We chose well. We did. 6 months later, Clara threw another dinner party. Not to prove anything this time, but simply because Thornwick had become known as a place where interesting people gathered. Artists and writers mixed with merchants and minor nobility. Conversations ran late into the night, ranging from politics to poetry to the price of wool. Lady Hartwell attended, bringing Vivian with her, the governess permitted to join as a guest this time, a small acknowledgement of changing status. Your home is lovely, Lady Hartwell said to Clara. So warm, so lived in. Thank you. That's exactly what we were going for. Clara watched Vivian throughout the evening. Her cousin was quieter now, more observant. She listened more than she spoke. When she did talk, it was thoughtful instead of cutting. At one point, Vivian approached Clara in a quiet corner. I've been offered a position, she said, as headmistress at a girls' school. In Bath. Claire's eyebrows rose. That's wonderful. Will you take it? I think so. It's a chance to actually make a difference. To help girls like, she paused, like we both were, trapped and told we're powerless. That's important work, Clara said sincerely. You'll be good at it. I hope so. Vivian hesitated. Thank you, Clara, for giving me a second chance. I know I didn't deserve it. Maybe not, but people change. You've proven that. Clara touched her cousin's arm. Go to Bath, build something good, and write to me about it. I will. Later that night, after all the guests had left, Clara found Rowan in the library. He was reading to Eleanor, who was supposed to be sleeping but was instead grabbing at the pages. She's determined, Clara observed, like her mother. Rowan looked up. Good party? Very good. Vivian's leaving for Bath, taking a headmistress position. How do you feel about that? Clara considered. Glad. She's finally finding her own path instead of living in someone else's shadow. That's what everyone deserves. Rowan set aside the book, settling Eleanor against his shoulder. You know what I think? What? I think we should have another child. Clara laughed. Oh, do you? Eleanor needs a sibling, someone to torment and be tormented by. Very thoughtful of you. Clara moved closer, running her fingers through Eleanor's dark hair. We could wait a bit. Make sure we're ready. Or, Rowan said, eyes glinting, we could start trying now and see what happens. Clara felt heat rise in her face. That's very practical of you, Your Grace. I'm a practical man. Are you? Clara leaned in, kissing him while Eleanor grabbed at her mother's hair. I hadn't noticed. 2 years later, they had a son, James Rowan Hale, named for the groundskeeper who'd found the dummy in the pond, the man who'd been loyal and brave when it mattered. The christening was a grand affair. Uncle Richard attended, older and frailer now, but present. He held his great-nephew carefully and said to Clara, You've done well for yourself. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even particularly warm, but it was acknowledgement. Thank you, Uncle. Your aunt. He paused, clearing his throat. Eleanor was wrong about you. I was wrong about you. You were never meant to be small. We just couldn't see it. Clara's throat tightened. No, you couldn't. Can you forgive an old fool? Clara looked at this man who'd housed her but never saw her, who'd given her shelter but never home. I can try. For my children's sake, if nothing else, they should know their family. Uncle Richard nodded. That's more than I deserve. Thomas brought his new wife, a bright, sharp-tongued woman named Margaret, who Clara liked immediately. They announced they were expecting their first child in the fall. We're building something different, Thomas told Rowan, something like what you two have, partnership instead of performance. Good, Rowan said. That's what matters. Vivian sent a gift, a beautifully bound book of poetry with an inscription, for James. May he grow up knowing he matters. May his mother teach him that truth, as she taught me. Clara cried reading it. Happy tears, healing tears. The world was changing slowly. Women were beginning to speak more openly about unhappy marriages, about wanting more than decoration and duty. Clara found herself hosting discussions in her drawing room, gatherings of women from all walks of life, talking about education and autonomy and choice. You're becoming dangerous, Rowan teased after one particularly lively evening. Is that a problem? Not at all. I've always been attracted to dangerous women. Clara threw a cushion at him. 5 years after their marriage, on a cold November evening, Clara and Rowan stood at the pond where this had all nearly ended before it began, the pond where Catherine had died, where someone had tried to terrorize Clara. We should fill it in, Rowan said. Turn it into something else. No, Clara said. It's part of our history, part of what made us. It's a reminder of pain. It's a reminder that we survived, that we built something good from something terrible. Clara took his hand. Let's leave it. But let's also make sure our children know the whole story, the truth of it, not just the pretty parts. Rowan pulled her closer. You want to tell them about Catherine, about the dummy, about everything? When they're old enough, yes. I want them to understand that life isn't perfect, that people make mistakes, that you can survive terrible things and still build beauty. Clara looked at the still water, reflecting the evening sky. I want them to know their mother was once nobody, that she chose to become somebody. That choice is always possible, even when it's terrifying, especially then. They stood there as darkness fell, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their own lives and built something neither had believed possible. 10 years after their marriage, Eleanor was learning to paint in Clara's studio. She was talented, their daughter, patient and observant, with her father's focus and her mother's eye for detail. James was running through the halls with the Hartwell children, who were visiting while their parents attended a political dinner. The noise was tremendous. Should we stop them? Rowan asked. Probably, Clara said, but I'm enjoying my tea too much. They sat in the library, surrounded by books and comfort and the chaos of a full house. Clara's latest painting hung over the fireplace, a landscape of Thornwick, not as it appeared, but as it felt. Warm, alive. Home. I got a letter from Vivian, Clara said. Her school is thriving. She's engaged to the local vicar, a widower with 3 children. Think she'll be happy? I think she'll work at it. That's all any of us can do. Rowan set down his book. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd said no, if you'd stayed at Ashford Manor? Clara considered this. Sometimes, I think I would have survived. I always did. But I wouldn't have lived. There's a difference. There is. Do you think about what would have happened if you'd never come to that party? Never met me? All the time, Rowan admitted. I think I would have continued existing, going through the motions, being the Duke everyone expected and the man no one knew. He reached for her hand. You didn't save me, Clara, but you gave me a reason to save myself. That's worth more. 15 years after their marriage, Eleanor was preparing for her first season in London. James was deep in studies, determined to be a barrister despite the family's protests that he could do anything he wanted. I want to earn my place, he'd insisted, like Mother did. Clara had been so proud she'd cried. Now, helping Eleanor prepare for her debut, Clara found herself thinking about the girl she'd been at that age. Invisible, unwanted, convinced she'd never matter. Mother? Eleanor asked. Are you nervous about me going to London? Terrified, Clara admitted. Why? Because society can be cruel, because people will judge you, because I want you to find what I found, someone who sees you for who you are, and I'm afraid you'll settle for less. Eleanor smiled. You taught me never to settle, to know my worth. I won't forget that. Good. And Eleanor? Yes? If anyone ever makes you feel small, leave. Don't wait for permission. Don't shrink yourself to fit their expectations. Just leave. Eleanor hugged her mother tightly. I promise. 20 years after their marriage, Clara stood in a drawing room in London, surrounded by the very people who'd once whispered about her marriage to the dangerous Duke of Thornwick. Lady Hartwell was there, now in her 70s and half blind but still opinionated. Lord Pemberton and his second wife, Thomas and Margaret, now parents to 4 children, and Vivian, who traveled from Bath with her husband and stepchildren. They'd gathered for a celebration, the publication of Clara's first book, a collection of essays about women's autonomy written under her own name, Duchess Clara Hale. No hiding, no shame. I never thought I'd see the day, Lady Hartwell said, when a duchess would write such radical things. Times change, Clara replied calmly, or rather, we change them. The book had caused a scandal, exactly as Clara had intended. Women across England were reading it, discussing it, using it to start conversations about their own lives. Rowan stood beside her, proud and protective. Their children were grown now, Eleanor happily married to a scholar who treated her like a partner, James establishing himself as one of London's most promising young lawyers. And Clara had become exactly what she'd always had the potential to be. Not small, not quiet, not grateful for scraps. Powerful, honest, free. That night, back at their London townhouse, Rowan found Clara in the library. You did it, he said. You changed the conversation. We did it together. Clara looked at her husband, gray now at the temples, lines around his eyes from years of laughter. Still the most beautiful man she'd ever seen. None of this would have been possible without you. You would have found a way. You always do. Maybe, but it wouldn't have been as good, as true. Clara moved into his arms. 20 years, can you believe it? Barely. Sometimes I still feel like that man on the terrace, meeting you for the first time. And what did you think of me then? That you were furious, trapped, desperate for escape. Rowan kissed her forehead. That you were the most honest person I'd met in years. And now? Now I think you're the strongest person I know, the bravest, the one who taught me that choosing truth over performance was the only way to actually live. Clara's eyes burned with happy tears. We chose well. We did. They stood there in the library, surrounded by books and memories, and the life they'd built from nothing but honesty and hope. Outside, London bustled. Inside, two people who'd found each other in the darkness held tight to what they'd created together. A legacy. Not of titles or fortune, though they had those too, but of truth. Of choosing themselves when the world demanded they be smaller. Of proving that mattering wasn't something people granted you. It was something you took, and once taken, it could never be stolen away. Clara thought of the girl she'd been, standing on a terrace, being told she was never meant to matter. She thought of the woman she'd become, standing in a library, knowing she mattered more than she'd ever imagined possible. The distance between those two moments was everything. It was a lifetime. It was freedom. It was enough.